Scythe is a deceptive game. Yes, it's a sort of 4X set in an alternate timeline, steampunk post-war Europe, but you see all these hulking great mechs and people on a map and you sort of assume it's going to have plenty of combat, but it doesn't. It's a game of beauty that really draws you in, thanks to the artwork of Jacob Rosalski's World of 1920 Plus alternate post-war series. But Scythe is very much not what you expect it to be. In many ways, it's better. It is, in fact, one of my favourite games. It has 3 expansions available, one of which is an entire campaign system. Now, to be clear, I have the legendary edition of the game here because I was a Kickstarter backer way back. Now that means I have a few extra cards here and there. I also have the extremely large version of the board. And I have some very nice resin, metal resources and coins, that sort of thing. That said, other than a few Kickstarter exclusive cards for encounters and such, most of this isn't exclusive at all. And it's all still very much in print, so you should have no trouble picking it up if you want, as well as any expansions and upgrades that you want to add in. Scythe is designed and published by Jamie Stegmaier of Stegmaier Games and is widely available for 1 to 5 players. I'm James Bruce and you're watching Tabletop Dungeon Board Game Reviews, and I hope you'll join me for a look at Scythe and why it's one of my favourite games. So, at its heart, although Scythe looks like a fairly standard 4X affair, and it does sort of technically tick those boxes, explore, your character is mainly used to explore the map, grabbing bonuses in the form of random encounters. Expand, you want to build out your empire with units, structures and mechs. You'll be rewarded for how much territory you own at the end of the game. Exploit, you use your workers to generate 4 different resource types. And finally, exterminate. Your character and mechs can initiate a battle with another player and the loser is sent packing back home. But in reality, it's actually an engine builder. And a lot of your focus will be on optimizing your turns by using these clever and unique dual action player boards. So let's talk about the win conditions first, because it sort of sets out the rest of the game. In Scythe, money is points, and any money you accumulate during the game, in the end scoring phase, you'll assess the state of your empire, and everyone earns money based on 4 factors. Firstly, how many achievements you have. A maximum of 6 of the 10 different achievements are possible, and you'll indicate this with your star tokens. And once anyone has achieved their 6th achievement, that triggers the game end, and immediate scoring will occur. You'll also score based on how many territories you control. Then you score a little for accumulated and unused resources. And finally, there'll be a small unique bonus each game, depending on where structures are built. Now here's the kicker. How much you actually score for those first 3 items of achievements, territories and resources will be dramatically affected by your current popularity level. So if you end the game having been horrible to every encounter that you do, you may control half the board, but you'll only be scoring half the points per territory and per achievement, while those that are loved but have much less overall control will be scoring more coins for each factor. So it's not necessarily the person who ended the game by landing their final achievement that actually wins in the end, or even the person who dominates the entire board. When all is said and done, someone else may have a higher final monetary value, even with less achievements. So how does the game actually play? What's this dual action player board thing I was talking about? This is your player board, and it has 4 possible columns for you to choose each turn, and you can't choose the same thing twice in a row. Each column has both the top and bottom action. You can do both, or just one or the other. Sometimes you won't be able to do both, but you do the top action first and then the bottom action if possible. Most actions consist of a cost and a benefit, though some actions are free. Now here's where it gets really interesting. There are 5 of these player boards in the base game, and they're all unique in that the bottom actions are in the same order on each board, but the top actions are not. So the exact pairing of top and bottom actions are different. In addition to that, the costs of the bottom actions aren't the same. So some player boards will be able to build mechs cheaper than others, that sort of thing. So you can already see that your playstyle is going to need to adjust each game. Your focus on what you're doing will need to change. But on top of that, your player board is going to be randomly paired with a faction board. Again, in the base game, there are 5 factions or nations. These determine your home starting place, your minis, and your mech's unique abilities. So with both a random faction and a random player board, you have no less than 25 different combinations of boards just in the base game. It's both somewhat asymmetric, but I also think very balanced, and to me that's really fun. Now, how can that possibly be balanced, you might ask? Well, for a start, each player and faction board has different start conditions. So your faction board determines your starting army power and combat cards, while your player board determines your money, popularity, and order of turns. So there is some balance there right off the bat. But essentially, each game is going to be a new puzzle for you. Okay, so why did I say the game is deceptive? Well, mostly because it looks like it's going to be a game about fighting these big mechs for control of the board. And while you can do that, combat is actually such a small part of the game. The benefits are often not that great. And most of the time, your mech's main role will actually be in logistics, dragging your workers and resources around to get to different resources. Posturing and the threat of battle is more important than actual fighting. I mentioned that the game ends when someone places their 6th achievement. Well, up to 2 of those achievements can come from winning combat, but only 2. Anything beyond those first 2 battles that you win will not contribute to your final score. So it's not uncommon for a game to pass by where there's only been 2 or 3 battles in total. Feasibly, you could have one without any fighting at all. It's almost always better to avoid combat unless you absolutely need to. For instance, to gain control of the factory in the center of the board, which awards you with a unique action card and counts as 3 territories at the end of the game. Or just to grab that final achievement that you need to finish the game. Much like real war, it's generally just a waste of resources to aggressively pursue a combat victory. So I mentioned that there were 10 possible achievements that you mark with these stars. Once your 6th star is placed, the game is over immediately and you count up the scores. But what achievements are there then? What can you be rewarded for in the game? Essentially, everything that you can do in the game, if you max it out, is going to give you an achievement. So as well as winning your first 2 battles, you'll find you get stars for performing all 6 possible upgrades on your playable board. We'll get onto that in a minute. Deploying all 4 of your mechs, building all 4 structures, enlisting all 4 spies, getting out all of your workers onto the board, 8 in total, doing one of your starting 2 secret objective cards, getting maximum popularity and getting maximum power, though the latter 2 needn't be kept at a maximum. You just need to get to that point once, then you can spend it again if you want. So I'm not going to go into the rules and the intricacies of how to actually play the game turn by turn, but I do want to show you a populated player board so you can see some of the upgrade mechanisms that allow you to build out your player action engine. So these 6 small cubes that you see are called upgrades, which you pay a certain amount of oil to perform, and an upgrade means that you move a cube from anywhere on the top row to anywhere on the bottom row. Now this is genius. As you uncover something on the top row, you get an additional benefit to that specific action. And as you slot it into the bottom row, you make that action choice cheaper. Now this extends to structures too. As you build each one, it confers some kind of a benefit. So for instance, building the mill reveals that when you produce, the mill will now also produce, in addition to any other hexes that you've got shown there. And the same is true of enlisting these spies or soldiers on the bottom. These guys will not only give you an additional benefit when you perform a certain bottom action, but also you get this ongoing bonus when a player either side of you takes that action too. So if your neighbor builds a mech and you've enlisted the mech building spy, then you are also going to get a coin. So that's what I mean when I say a lot of the action will be focused on your board, on optimizing every single turn and thinking 5 turns in advance to ensure that you can A, do both the bottom and top actions, and B, get the maximum benefit for the C, lowest cost. And this is the core game loop. not strategically flanking your enemies and destroying them in battle. That's literally not a thing. There's no flanking in this game. The board does look incredible and impressive, but in gameplay terms, it's just another part of the puzzle. Movement can be quite complex. All of the basic factions start isolated on an island and can't really move off it until they build a mech with the ability to ferry workers across or gain access to the tunnel network. But even then, each faction can only move across the river in specific ways. Now, once you have access to the tunnel network, you can jump around the board a lot more easily, and most factions will have their own special tunneling ability too if you decide to unlock that mech instead. Lastly, let's briefly cover some of the expansions for Scythe. The first is called Invaders from Afar. It's a very simple two-player expansion which adds rules and minis for 2 additional factions that you'll see in the corners of the board. These factions both have a unique mechanism, and it's also interesting that they don't start landlocked. Then we have the Wind Gambit expansion, which adds 2 modules, one of which adjusts the victory condition slightly, gives you more options for achievement, and the other of which I think is more interesting, adds airships. And the airships' abilities change each game with both a unique defensive and offensive ability card. So again, adding yet more parts into this unique puzzle. Finally, there's the Rise of Fenris, which has secret components and tuck boxes in, so I'm not going to spoil that, but as well as a competitive campaign mode with fairly elaborate story, it also features an optional co-op mode and various other modules that you can then either integrate or ignore in any future Scythe games. Just mix and match them as you wish with airships and extra players, however you want. It's a very modular game. So that's Scythe. In terms of how easy it is to learn the game, it's surprisingly simple to pick up the basics. You're only really choosing from 3 possible actions each turn, since you can't choose the same one again, except for one player which has that unique ability. And for the first few rounds at least, your path is likely to be fairly fixed. There are certainly different approaches you can take, but if you've decided, okay, this is how I'm going to achieve this, then your path is pretty well laid out for you. Now, that could also be seen as a criticism. It can feel a little bit railroaded when you get started in the early stages of the game. There's only very few choices of what you're actually going to do, and there's usually a very optimal one. But you will very soon need to start making impactful choices on strategy and adapting to game conditions as the game goes on. It really ramps up quickly. There is some reliance on text in that each player board has unique mech abilities. You'll need to understand those, as well as encounter cards from which you'll need to choose a particular course of action. But if anyone needs help understanding those, it's not secret information, so you can easily translate or help explain that. The only thing you might need to create a language-dependent cheat sheet for are these secret objective cards. Some are very simple to understand, while some can be a little bit more complex. So, in terms of ages, we've been playing with our 8-year-old son. As long as you're okay with gamified violence, there shouldn't be any content issues there. But while he's perfectly capable of understanding the rules and playing fairly and going through the motions, he does seem to lack the ability to do any sort of in-depth planning ahead and optimizing, so tends to be very short-term and reactive. Now, I don't know enough about child psychology to say if that's just because these skills haven't developed by that age or whether he just sucks, but I would recommend maybe 10 and up is probably more appropriate. So that's my thoughts on Scythe. It's currently rated 8.2 on Board Game Geek with a complexity score of sort of average 3.4. It is, as I say, a gorgeous game with an incredible table presence. It's relatively easy to get a grasp of the rules, but with a lot of potential for mastery and strategy in there. What it isn't, though, is a dudes on a map game of area control and epic mech battles. So if you're looking for that, look elsewhere. It's a puzzling engine builder, a little crunchy perhaps, where optimization is critical and you need to think 5-10 turns in advance. But if that sounds like something you'd like, then Scythe is well worth checking out and still, as I say, widely available. And if you like the sound of it, but not necessarily the theme, you might want to check out a slightly simplified version of it called My Little Scythe instead, which came after a fan reskinned the game for his daughter to enjoy. Though sadly the My Little Pony elements weren't able to make it to the final release, for obvious reasons. Alright, that's it from me. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you think I'm completely wrong about Scythe, tell me what you don't enjoy about it. It does seem to be quite a divisive game that some people think was just another overhyped Kickstarter. Otherwise, hit like, it would really help the channel, and be sure to subscribe. Don't worry, I'm not going to flood your homepage with 10 videos a day as some channels do, but perhaps I'll be able to show you a game that you'll enjoy too. Until next time, thanks for joining me in the tabletop dungeon.